And I promise that I won't repeat what I say during our digital events during today's event. And the reason is that we have very interesting and challenging initiative on the cyber mediation. And in the spirit of our slogan for this year, that Geneva is a place where technology meets humanity, we are going to meet digital technology, cyber tools, and one of the oldest skills in the history of humanity, which is mediation. And for that purpose, today in the room and online, and I would like to welcome our online followers during the session, we have that challenge to bridge two fields, cyber, digital, you use whatever prefix you would like, and mediation. And in the room and online, we have two communities following it, cyber community and the mediation community. And as always, it is a real challenge to reduce lost in translation and to create bridges, to reduce the acronym soup. And I'm sure that today, with this starting event, and throughout our exercise and discussion, we'll manage to create many bridges for the benefit of overall mediation and peaceful solution of conflicts worldwide. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Enrico Formiga, who has been conceptualizer of the Cyber Mediation Initiative. Enrico is from the UN, and he came in January to other partners who are around the table, the Humanitarian Dialogue, swisspeace, Harvard University, with the idea that we should do something around cyber mediation, and in very, let's say, startup, bottom-up approach. He introduced it, and we are today here to advance discussion. Now we'll hear from Enrico. What is the plan for today?
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, thank you for joining us today for this launch of the initiative on cyber mediation. It is a little bit of a new concept, we hope, and we hope to make progress in defining it and studying it and developing it with you, starting today and going forward. First of all, let me thank Jovan and his organization, DiploFoundation, for hosting us today so generously, including a nice lunch that we just had. And thank all the partners for joining, and of course, for all of you to come here in this room, and for all of those who are joining us in the virtual room that is connected. We will spend today the next couple of hours together. We'll first hear a message from the Director General of the United Nations in Geneva, Michael Moller, and then followed by a brief introduction on the Cyber Mediation Initiative. We will then present the thematic groups that we hope will carry forward this reflection in the coming months. I was told that today we have about 220 participants registered for this event, of which about, I think, 60 or 70 are here in this room, and the remaining 150 are connected to the web platform. So we are also trying to create this dynamic using cyber tools in a way that possibly will also be applied in the future of cyber mediation. At the end of the session, we plan to post the recording of the proceeding of the discussion on YouTube. So the meeting, although it is on registration, I would define it as semi-public. So we will just keep that in mind in case you make some comment. We will also have an additional little treat, I think, at the end that we'll present at the end of the session. We'll have a professional graphic illustrator that is following us online from Belgrade, that at the end he will try to provide us a sketch, a graphic illustration of what we've discussed, and possibly we can adopt it as our design going forward. So this is a little bit the plan for the day. And without further ado, I would like to play the message from the Director General of the United Nations, Michael Moller. Thank you.
Dear participants, over the past decades, technology has revolutionized every facet of our lives, including the way we handle relationships, diffuse crises, and mediate disputes. Information flows faster today than ever before. Secrets are easier to leak. Negotiators are harder to isolate from outside pressure. And many other positive and negative impacts of the digital revolution on mediation are yet to be identified. It is for this reason that I am particularly pleased to welcome this Cyber Mediation Initiative and the parties who are responsible for making it happen: the Department of Political Affairs of the United Nations, DiploFoundation, the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, swisspeace, and researchers from Harvard University. Initiatives like this are vital to explore the impact of digital technology in the field of mediation. In preventing and resolving violent conflicts, mediators should really have the sharpest tools at their disposal, and technology can certainly provide innovative solutions to mediators. And at the same time, it may also unleash risks that need to be carefully managed. The Cyber Mediation Initiatives builds on the main strengths of International Geneva. First, it is a global hub for action on innovation and cutting-edge issues, as it is home to institutions like CERN, the International Telecommunications Union, the Internet Governance Forum, and the World Economic Forum, to name but a few. Second, International Geneva is built on partnerships between the United Nations and a wide range of different actors. And finally, International Geneva focuses on mediation as we support the work of special representatives and envoys of the Secretary-General, as well as host talks on a variety of crises, as, for example, the conflicts in Syria, Georgia, and Cyprus. UN Geneva stands ready to support efforts to address the opportunities and challenges brought by technology, knowing that this work will require fresh thinking and new partnerships. And in closing, I'd like to encourage all relevant actors to collaborate with the Cyber Mediation Initiative and to share their knowledge and experience with others. I look forward to hearing about progress in your discussions and to other opportunities to engage with you again on cyber mediation. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Director General, for this very encouraging words to the partners that are promoting this initiative, but in a way, encouraging word for all of us participating in this meeting, because we really hope that will become a collaborative effort in opening new ground on this somewhat new topic. Now, I would like to now spend the next few minutes to just try to give you a brief introduction on the concept of the cyber mediation and on the initiative, how it was born and how we intend to bring it forward. First of all, I would just like to tell you a little anecdote to describe how the initiative came about. During Geneva Peace Week last November, we organized an event on local mediation. And among the different speakers, there was an engineer coming from Ukraine. And this gentleman had created a platform for what is now known as the Donbas Dialogue in Ukraine, for this region of Donbas that is in conflict. And so he illustrated how different parties and stakeholders that cannot meet anymore in person because of the conflict are now interacting in a rather complex web structure of different rooms, and they exchange ideas and they negotiate local agreements and so on based on that, using that platform. And I was really fascinated by that story, and really kind of it was a little bit of an eye-opener on the potential of technology. And so I started a little bit thinking through, and this is just but one simple example. And so I started thinking through the many different potential that technology can provide to mediators. And so I started brainstorming this idea with some of our partners, and the most prominent are certainly here today with us, to find out that they were also thinking in similar ways. They were also thinking about the impact of digital technology on mediation. Not only thinking, some of them, as typically happen with private entities, they were already ahead of us, and they were already preparing studies in different fields and so on. So we agreed to join forces to launch, to create this initiative that we will be presenting today. The Department of Political Affairs that I represent here, DiploFoundation, the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, swisspeace, and the researchers from Harvard University have decided to explore how digital technology is impacting the work of mediators around the world. Now, mediation has traditionally been considered a low-tech field, where the premium is on interpersonal skill. skills that are useful in mediation are normally mentioned, such as emotional intelligence, empathy, creativity. And I don't think that this is going to change, and for sure it is not our ambition to change this human dimension of mediation, which will remain certainly an essential element. Jokingly, I say, I try to assure mediators that we are not trying to replace them with robots. This is not the idea. We're just trying to provide them additional tools for performing their very difficult jobs. But we nevertheless believe that mediation is not immune from the development of digital technology, which will present both opportunities and challenges and risks that need to be managed. It is not the future for mediation. It is already happening. And I will just give you some examples. Mediators are definitely already using instant messages in their negotiations and in their communications. They use social media for outreach and to monitor the public sentiments of the people they are trying to help. They observe implementation of ceasefires using digital mapping and other digital tools. They use databases to develop text, to search text for peace agreement, and in many other ways. On the other hand, they are also confronted with a number of challenges. For example, are their digital communication protected? Are they confidential? It's very important. What is the impact of social media on their work? Is it just positive or it has also a negative impact? What happens when the parties tweet from the negotiating room, and so while you are still negotiating, the news are already out in all the media? These are all a set of challenges that we cannot ignore. It is just simply happening. Now, I'm a part of the mediation support unit of the Department of Political Affairs. And as the name itself says, the mediation support unit is a unit that was created to provide specialized professional support to mediation. And we are witnessing these developments, this impact of digital technology in all the different peace processes that we are supporting all around the world. So we believe that cyber mediation is a vast and promising territory, which we want to explore together with all of you. We'll try to inform mediation practitioners about the impact of technology and promote synergies with the private and technological sector, which I think these synergies are not yet fully developed. I think there is a lot of work that can be done there to bring these two communities, apparently very different, together. So we hope that by the end of the year, this is the time frame that we set for ourselves, at least for this initial phase of the initiative, so during the 2018, we hope that by the end of the year, we'll be able to formulate initial, and I stress initial, suggestions on cyber mediation, which will help mediators in their daily work. I'm saying initial suggestion because I suspect, I do not know, and we will starting now, I suspect that once we open this new ground, it will be huge, it will be vast, and the opportunities will be many. So I'm not sure that we'll be able to complete all this work. We will see. If it is completed, even better. But technology, anyway, will continue to develop. So maybe there will be a need to go deeper on certain issue, but we will assess. For the moment, the time frame, as I said, is the year. And we decided to organize the work going forward in the year along 4 thematics groups. And these groups will have, each of them, a facilitator. The organizations represented here will facilitate different groups, and the facilitator will be responsible for organizing the methods of work of the group, organizing the events, the activities, connecting with the participants, seeking help when needed, and so on. So in a moment, the facilitators will present their group themselves, and you will hear directly from them how they intend to organize their work. For the moment, I just want to list the thematic groups and the respective facilitators. One group will deal with the impact of new technology on mediation, and it will be facilitated by Humanitarian Dialogue and Harvard University, that are represented here on my right. Another group will deal with social media and will be coordinated by swisspeace. Then another group will be on data for mediation, facilitated by DiploFoundation. And the 4th group will be on artificial intelligence, including text mining, also facilitated by DiploFoundation. We have decided to structure our work in thematic groups to involve as many partners as possible in these thematic reflections. So that's why we call it group. So that's why we call the leading kind of facilitator, because their job will be to bring together different inputs, starting hopefully with the inputs that you will be contributing today. As I said, we are venturing into new territory, and none of us here around this table have all the answer. We have a lot of questions, and we hope to have answers at some point, possibly before the end of the year, at least some of them. And we also hope that many of you will decide to contribute after hearing our presentations today. I was told that we have 220 participants registered today. That to me signals like a very strong interest. 70 are here in the room, 150 in the virtual room, as I said. And I'm sure that there is not only a lot of people participating, but there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of skills, a lot of resources, network, contacts, and so on. So we hope that you will bring that in this initiative, because I think this is a huge capital that is represented here today. As a first substantive contribution to this work, the Geneva Graduate Institute is considering assisting us through their capstone project that, if our application is accepted, will provide us 2 or 3 researchers, students, that will help us carrying forward this initiative with a particular focus on the private sector. This is our idea. So, once again, a warm welcome to all of you joining today, here and on the web. There will be opportunity for all of us to share ideas, to make comments, although we have limited time. But please do start contributing already today. And as I said, the idea is to develop this initiative all together. Let's develop cyber mediation together. Thank you very much. I will now take again the role of the moderator for this discussion, and will now move to the presentation of the thematic groups. We'll present first the first 2, and then we'll have a moment of discussion. Then we'll present other 2, followed by another moment of discussion and conversation. So I'm now So I'm now very pleased to introduce Ms. Joelle Jenny from the Harvard University, which is collaborating also with the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and she will talk about the impact of new technologies on mediation. Joelle, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Enrico, and thank you to colleagues from DiploFoundation for hosting us today. In a moment, I will give you a little bit of a scene setter of what we're doing on that particular piece of work, but maybe, Jonathan, why don't you just set the scene in relation to Harvard, to the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. Harvard is me, I'll have to not mix up.
Sure. I also have a small story, I guess. During the Oslo Forum that took place last year in June, the Oslo Forum is a bit like the Burning Man, but without the sex and the nudity and the drugs, the Burning Man of mediation practitioners. So we had this event last year in June, and there was a session on the impact of new technologies on mediation. During that session, it became very clear that there was a lot of ignorance as to the tools that are being used, but also the impact that they can have on mediation concretely, the impact of these new technologies. And so we decided, after a discussion with Joelle Jenny from Harvard University, that maybe it'd be interesting to conduct a research on the topic. And so we've started this back in October, I believe. And what we're trying to look at is really the impact, but also to produce a publication which would look into the challenges that these new technologies have created, the options that mediators have and conflict parties have, but also try to look into the future of mediation and how new technologies might impact on conflict mediation in the future. And so we've been working on this for about 6 months. We've been conducting a literature review, but also quite a few interviews with practitioners, with experts. And I think best is maybe if Joelle introduces the substance of what we've been doing.
Great. And it's very exciting to see the interest in this field. The way I came about it is I'm currently at Harvard doing research on a number of topics in relation to how new technologies are changing the entire field of peace and security. That's linked with the fact that I, as a former senior official working for the EU, I was really struck at the number of instances where our traditional ways of approaching peace and security are now being challenged in positive and in negative ways by the way the new technologies are changing the way we communicate, the way we seek information, the way everyone can access information. And we do really need to, I think, reassess some of our fundamental approaches and assumptions about how we go about trying to promote greater peace and stability. So that's been the work that I've been doing at Harvard for the past year and a half, looking at a broad range of issues, including how cybersecurity is changing, how artificial intelligence is changing, and so on. And so, as Jonathan has said, the idea with this particular project was to really drill down in one specific field and look at particularly mediation, because it's one area where so much relies on how an individual can build personal contact and trust. And so how does new technology, new means of communication come into play into that? What has been really striking, sort of as part of the literature reviews and the interviews we've been conducting, is the extent to which mediation is possibly not the field that's been most advanced at embracing technology. And we've also been looking at what, for example, humanitarian actors have been doing, that have been much more forthcoming on the whole in embracing technology, but also recognizing its challenges. So you have now a lot of new platforms, new technologies in order to better reach out people, resolve some of the access questions, and facilitate awareness of the context. That has not necessarily completely permeated in how mediators themselves use the technology. What we see is the mediators that we are sort of interviewing use a lot of, sort of Twitter or WhatsApp or to some extent Facebook. The primary usages are in order to reach out to their counterparts, to the conflict parties. We see slightly less focus on how the technology can help better understand the conflict drivers and do a proper in-depth assessment of the conflict dynamic, how they evolve over time. Some mediators whom we have interviewed are very advanced in understanding those technologies and what they afford in terms of sort of doing the conflict analysis. Others are a lot more traditional and a lot more hesitant to embrace those technologies. But what has been striking as well is we've looked in particular at the risks that are associated with the use of those technologies. And as our work now evolves, we're focusing on trying to conceptualize those risks in order to help mediators when they are in the field, when they are in the middle of a peace negotiation, think through those risks. In other words, they are, and our risk framework is still currently evolving, but broadly speaking, our sort of current assumptions, and we'll look forward to feedback, by the way, from participants. It will be very interesting to hear your reactions and your comments, is broadly speaking, there are issues around physical risks that people need to consider, because any mobile devices come with all sorts of tracking devices. Therefore, you constantly give away a lot of data on where you are and what you do, and so do the parties. And how do you conceptualize those risks? How do you think about them? Obviously, question about information confidentiality. very central. How do you protect the information? Do you need to protect your information? There may be some kinds of mediation or negotiations where you're perfectly comfortable assuming that everybody is tapping into the communication, and that's fine. There may be other instances where protecting the confidentiality of the information is absolutely critical. And which technology is actually secure? How do you find out? Because this is a very fast evolving field. Something that is currently secure may not be secure, as there is almost, I would say, an arms race where all the actors, not just governments, criminal organizations, any of the sort of organizations and dodgy characters you may find in a conflict environment, and that's a long list, are increasingly capable to acquire hacking means, spoofing means, so that means pretending to be somebody else, change the integrity of your data, and so on and so forth. That technology is evolving very fast. It is available on the private market. Just Google it. You can buy anything, any kit to hack and spoof information. It's more and more. So this is a really, really fast evolving field. What does it mean for a mediator trying to make those decisions? There are issues around data integrity. I mentioned spoofing. You can increasingly pretend to be somebody. You can potentially send fake messages, impersonating somebody, and totally transform the dynamic of a mediation. There are reputation risks for a mediator, particularly in relation to the use of social media, how you communicate with the public, but also how your own reputation can be put at stake by people who want to use social media to discredit the mediation. So those are just some of the risks that we're currently looking at and trying to exemplify in order to help basically mediator think through the trade-offs that they have to consider, because ultimately this is what it boils down to. The technology offers huge opportunities to access people you cannot access normally, to talk to people without risking your own life or their own life, to sort of accelerate the pace, but it also come with all those risks and many more that I don't have the time to go into details today. So how do you think of those risks? How do you consider the trade-offs between convenience, security, and ultimately what are the ethical and operational responsibilities of a mediator? Some people consider that the mediator leaves it to the conflict party to decide which technology is safe. Because after all, if the conflict parties are still alive, that means they know how to deal with their own security. So therefore, you can make an assumption that they will know best what to use. But is it good enough? Because actually, as a mediator, the moment you accept to use one particular technology to communicate over another, you in effect validate that technology, you vouch for it. Is that good enough, depending on the context? We currently, as our work is evolving, are towards the side of saying, actually, that's not quite good enough. And a mediator does have to be digitally literate, does need to be able to make those assessments about the trade-offs, about the digital environment in which they are operating, the kind of surveillance, hacking, spoofing, and other capabilities that are being used in the conflict where they are operating, and then making the trade-offs, actually bearing that in mind. What information do I need to protect? What are the risks that I am considering? And how do I go about mitigating those risks? So that's, I'll stop here because this is still work in progress. As I said, we're very much interested in hearing what the network will be contributing to this work as we develop this framework. We don't have the ambition of telling anybody, use this app or that app, because this is too fast-moving a field. But what we want is to be able to help mediator know where to go when they are looking for information about what app is more secure than another one. And again, to help mediator ask themselves the right question, but ultimately it's only the mediator who can make that decision, but how to make it in an informed manner is what we're now going to work on within this group.
Thank you very much, Joël, for setting the scene with this very good presentation. I just have another little anecdote. Now we compete with anecdote. In my telephone, I have 2 or 3 instant messaging app, because 3 different negotiating mediation teams, they came and say, please download Telegram because it's secure. Okay, let's do it. The other one, no, we use WhatsApp because it is safer. Okay, let's download WhatsApp. The other one comes, well, Signal is the best of all of them, and so I downloaded Signal. Now, I do not want to vouch for any of those, but just tell us, in a way, the challenges that we are confronted of. Maybe the reality is that all of them are secure to a certain degree and unsecure to a certain degree, and so it will be then a matter of choice for different mediator. Just a small story coming from the mediation world. It is now the turn of Mr. David Lantz from swisspeace that will introduce the group on social media and mediation.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Thanks to DPA and colleagues from the DiploFoundation, HD, and Harvard for launching this initiative. I think the turnout today, both here in the room as well as in the virtual space, confirms the relevance of this topic. Now, within the initiative, swisspeace covers the topic of social media and mediation. And the driving force behind it is really my colleague Ahmed Eleiba, and all the difficult questions you will ask will be directed to him. Of course, I don't have a Burning Man anecdote to share about why we are interested in this topic, but simply to say at swisspeace we do research on mediation processes, and we also work practically to support mediation processes. And in different contexts we work, the topic of social media has come up, and it's clear to everybody that this is changing the dynamics of mediation. It needs to be taken seriously, but there seems to be a lack of strategic engagement with social media. And in a way, our hope with this initiative is to come up with a few pointers in that regard. But before thinking of strategically engaging with social media, I thought it would make sense to capture why the increasing use of social media and the increasing spread of social media is relevant in mediation processes, and why, in fact, mediators and mediation teams ought to pay attention to this. And I have a list of 10 reasons why social media is relevant in mediation processes, and looking forward to your inputs as to which of those is the one that really we should focus on. But the first reason why social media is relevant in mediation processes is that social media has become a tool of warfare. There is increasing talk about the weaponization of social media. And I think ISIL's use of social media to incite violence, disseminate propaganda, recruit fighters as well, served as a bit of a wake-up call in this regard. And insofar as social media affects the dynamics of conflict, mediators who operate in these conflicts, they need to be aware of this. So that's the first reason. The second one, and it's related, is that social media is where the battle for narratives about a given conflict takes place. These are interpretive frame in terms of what is happening in a conflict, who is responsible, and what should be done about it. And there, journalist has coined it hashtag wars, where opposing sides, they vie for getting their views trending on Twitter as a way to indicate their followership and to emphasize the legitimacy of their cause. Hashtag Rohingya, hashtag Syria are examples of hashtags having experienced these kind of narrative battles. And again, these are important factors influencing the dynamics in a conflict, and mediators have to be aware of it. Third reason, and this speaks to the work of colleagues from the DiploFoundation, diplomacy is increasingly taking space in social media platforms. Concepts such as WhatsApp diplomacy, Twitter diplomacy have been coined to capture this trend. And one figure puts the percentage of world governments who have a presence on social media at 87, just a small indicator. And I think for mediators operating in the diplomatic space to gain support for their efforts and to shape the narrative around a process, it is important to engage with that virtual space in which diplomacy happens. Then a fourth reason is that social media shapes the public perceptions both of the process and of agreements resulting from the process. And this can really go as far as to make or break an agreement. And I think Colombia is a relevant example in that respect. In the referendum October 2016 about the peace agreement between the FARC and the Colombian government, the No campaign was quite active on social media, and there are some observers that said this helped them to win over especially urban voters, and that was one factor why, in fact, the referendum was negative. The peace agreement was rejected. Then a fifth reason is that social media is potentially a potent source of information for mediators, mediation teams. Information available through social media, in particular Facebook, allow mediators to better understand where tensions are high, where conflicts take place, who the key actors are, who the influences are, what the narratives are, what the needs of the population on the ground is as well. And I think the potential of social media to help mediators recognize where conflicts could materialize and then act to prevent them is particularly promising. The sixth reason why mediators should pay attention or are paying attention to social media is that social media can be a tool to promote the inclusivity of a mediation process. So mediators can use social media to communicate with large circles, explain what they are doing, what their mandate is, where the talks stand, maybe also the limitations of their role. And vice versa, they can also use social media to solicit inputs from broad sectors of society, finding out what people care about, what aspirations they have, how they view a process. So social media is a tool for mediators to broaden the process without necessarily enlarging the negotiation table as such. Seventh reason, and we've heard this from Enrico and Joel already, social media facilitates the communication between mediators and parties, and the reliance on instant messaging tools, different ones, as you point out, is an indicator of this. You can convey messages, you can set up meetings, you can have, you can establish rapport with parties as well. So it's quite a powerful tool that enables an ease of communication between mediators and parties. At the same time, perhaps on the more problematic side, it personalizes communication and potentially acts against institutional memory. It's quite hard to archive a WhatsApp conversation, for example, and it may also be hard to have control over who a message is shared with. So that would be a risk there. Then the eighth reason is that access to social media and the use of social media by parties make leaks that break in confidentiality much more likely. It makes it more difficult for mediators to establish a protected space where parties are able to exchange views in a free and confident, in confidence. And there are examples from Ukraine that show where leaks frequently happen. It can really undercut the search of a compromise in a mediation process. A ninth reason why social media is relevant is that at the negotiation table, instant messaging systems means that mediators and parties, they have information at their fingertips. It means that mediators can communicate with their teams much more easily. They can be provided with speaking points, with facts to substantiate a certain claim, perhaps counter something that the other side said. So it changes the dynamics in the room at the negotiation table. And then a 10th reason why social media is relevant in mediation is what Enrico mentioned with his example from the Donbass dialogue. It's that social media can offer new spaces for dialogue, allowing people to communicate with each other, to listen to each other, to speak to one another who otherwise are not able to meet. And this has great potentially, especially in areas where personal meetings are not possible for logistical reasons, for security reasons, political reasons, maybe even legal reasons. And these spaces of dialogue, they can help maintain channels of communication, counteract the dehumanization of the other side, and that's broadly in support of the aims of a mediation process. So there you go, just a very broad, you may say somewhat superficial list of reasons, but I hope it does convey the point that while we don't quite yet know, well, what the social media fall on, is it a good thing for mediators, is it a bad thing? But I think it's clear that it's a thing, and that thing ought to be studied more, and this initiative is a small contribution to that effect, and in that sense, swisspeace is very happy to be part of this initiative.
Thank you very much, David, for this presentation, that social media are an important part of our life. I think it was already known before, but I think that your presentation really, in a very structured way, gave us some indication on why are important, in particular for mediation. So we really thank you for that, and of course we will try to develop further all these themes. Now, the idea is now to open the floor for a first round of discussion for the next 20 minutes or so. We will open the discussion on basically what you have heard so far, the general initiative, and on the two presentations. So this is the idea. While you are obviously free to ask further question and clarification, we also encourage you to already start thinking in terms of contribution, making suggestion, contribution, coming from your respective experience. We will take two comments from the floor and 2 comments from the web at the time. We ask you to keep it relatively brief, your intervention, so that we allow as many people as possible to interact. So this is the suggestion. The floor is open, and I see a gentleman over there and a lady over here. That they were faster than everybody else.
Thank you. Yes, Richard Hill. For those who don't know me, I'm actually a certified mediator and have done mediation, not conflict mediation, more commercial and family mediation. And also I've been involved in international diplomacy, so I think I have some good understanding. I'd like to commend all of the speakers. I think from my point of view, you hit all the issues squarely on the head, and this is exactly what we need to be doing, exactly what you've outlined. But I wanted to make one comment on something that you said at the beginning, Mr. Formica. What are the key skills in mediation? And I think the ones you mentioned are correct, but I think you left out the key one, which is to listen and to reframe, to understand what the other party said, and then to put it back in such a way that the other party can understand that. And there actually, I think that ICTs and online technology can significantly help. And there's an actual example from commercial mediation. I don't know if you were aware of it. It goes back to 1999. eBay at that time had a service called SquareTrade, which was actually online mediation for, eBay was an auction service. So you bought a car from somebody you never heard of. That's a case I actually did. card didn't work, who's right, who's wrong, who gets to pay for the repairs, etc. We did that all entirely online using some specialized tools that they had, which addressed some of the issues you've raised, confidentiality, etc., and so forth. I think the scheme was reasonably successful. It's since been discontinued. But that's an example of how indeed some of these tools can be used, because it's true it's about emotions and so on, but especially, as you pointed out, with the social media, it's also about getting the facts and who said what, when, and the written is very good for that. And then you can go back and point and said, well, 5 exchanges ago, you actually said this. Are you changing your mind? Or did you not mean that? And so on. And that is actually very helpful. So I think there's great potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A few hands here.
Yes, it's you.
I was waiting for a microphone.
Microphone is coming because of the online community.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thank you very much. Elodie Convergne, I'm a researcher on mediation at DCAF. I have 2 questions / comments. One is regarding what you say, David, about the the social media's ability to tap mediators into the framing of the conflicts and the pulse of what people think about the peace process and all that. And I was wondering what we can do to minimize the effect of these echo chambers that we've seen more and more. The fact that if you abide by, if you follow a certain opinion, then you will only receive feeds of this particular mindset, and if it's the other opinion, vice versa. We've seen that in the US, especially with the Trump presidency. And I'm sure it's very common on Facebook and on social media that you always see there are some views that are more prominent than others on the media, but that are not necessarily representative. And for me, it seems like we have to apply social science methodologies to this and to being extremely rigorous in consulting social media in a way that we make sure like we are aware of who it represents and who it does not represent, and the fact that it's not the whole picture. And in a way, it's an interesting challenge, but it's also something that, in my opinion, is very time-consuming, and we need to be very rigorous and maybe apply hire a full-time person who is just dedicated to that. Because otherwise, if we just check our Facebook feed or our Twitter feed when we get a chance to check the pulse of some particular discussion, in my opinion, it's not going to be representative, and it might be quite risky in a way because it might amplify these echo chambers. That's my first remark. My second remark is about the vastly debated counterterrorism debate. And, there is this conflict between the mediation community and the counterterrorism community about the fact that, mediators can talk to everybody, and also they don't necessarily want to share the information they received with counterterrorism agencies. And I was wondering if technology might increase the risks of authorities being able to track so-called terrorist targets by their contacts with mediators, because as a mediator, you might be engaged on WhatsApp with some ISIS defectors or some people who might be a target of some counterterrorism agencies in the West, even in Switzerland, in France, in all these countries. And so how, as a mediator, do you protect also the integrity of your interlocutors? And of course, you don't want to shield so-called terrorists, but at the same time, you don't want to expose them to pursuits if you are negotiating with them. So it seems to me that it's a dilemma. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these comments. We'll now have the opportunity to hear from Roxana a couple of comments or questions coming from our participants on the web.
Thank you very much. We have started a very vivid debate online, following the points made by the panelists, and we have one comment and 2 questions. The comment comes from Rajinder, who is saying, I believe we can't talk about tech without first defining the context of the mediation. Is it private or public? Is it one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many? The nature and the type of mediation are also important. He's asking for taking a historical approach to mediation and distinguishing further between mediation and public communication. And then we have 2 questions. The first one is, how can we measure the tangible impact of new technologies on mediation? And the second one is related to the institutional memory of the mediation process. If communication takes place through chats and via online platforms that are often accessible on a personal basis, for instance on mobile phones, What are the best ways to make sure that the exchanges and the communication are duly recorded and kept for future reference? Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think it will now give the opportunity to the presenters to react to some of the comments. On my side, just very, very quickly, addressing the first comment that came. What we are, it is true that maybe we were a little bit generic in talking about mediation. What we are talking here is about political mediation. It is political mediation for the peaceful resolution, prevention and resolution of conflicts. Mediation is obviously a very vast field, and the word per se, I take it for granted that is always political mediation, but there is much more out there. And actually, from parallel field, private mediation, commercial mediation, there is a lot to learn. Our focus, I think, it is clear, it is on political mediation for the prevention and resolution of conflict. So this is just a point of clarification if needed. And then I will give the floor to David and Joel to react to some of the comments. You can, I think, pick the one that you think are more relevant.
Thank you, and all very sort of valid comments and questions. Briefly reacting to three of them. And of course, just in addition, the last point about needing to be context specific. And that's precisely why in the guidance, we're not going to be sort of saying you should do this or you should do that, because there's no way you can have an overarching, that's the answer. And one of the primary and obvious point that's coming out is it is so context specific. The type of mediation that you're trying to do, is it humanitarian mediation? Is it political mediation? And of course, the level of digital sort of capabilities in the environment and so on. So, but going to the point about echo chambers, and I think that is a very, very important point, because there's a lot of hope, of course, that you can use big data analytics, machine learning, AI, to mine all that data, to learn about the context, to do to infer about the trends and so on. But there's huge manipulation of information, and there's a huge sort of incentive for all the parties to manipulate that information. So how do we equip ourselves? And there's not a simple answer to that. The big tech firms themselves are trying now increasingly to do something about bots, about any sort of those sort of digitally enabled ways of corrupting the social media platform. But I think from the point of view of a mediation team that wants to use social media and big data analytics to inform what they're doing, increasingly there will be a responsibility to have somebody in the team who is a data scientist. And I'm afraid there's just nowhere around it. Because if you just do anecdotally follow Twitter and Facebook, there's just no way you can really distinguish, what is a bot, what's the fake news, how it is manipulated. Whereas if you have a data scientist that works very, very closely with your mediation people, you can use the technology to actually do very detailed data mapping. You can do, there are ways now in which you can see who are the most influential Twitters, or you can recognize where are the bots. You can decide what kind of information you discard. And some of the most savvy partners we've interviewed say, for example, when they're looking at a conflict in Syria, they're just ignoring all the English-speaking Twitter and social media because they say this is noise. Just don't even use it. But that means you have to have the means and the capabilities to actually look at the local languages. And so it's a word of caution. There's a huge potential, but in order to use it adequately, you actually have to invest the resources so that you have the real expertise on your team, just as you would expect to have the best mediation experts part of the team. The fact that the authorities can track a mediator and through the mediator track the contacts is a real concern. And it's not just through the communication itself, because every mobile technology comes with all sorts of sensors. It is constantly beaming out where you are, who you talk to, and what you do. And switching off a phone is in itself not enough. Just having your technology off is in itself already giving away information about who you are and who you're talking with. So there's no simple answer apart from understanding the technology, which should be the starting point. Understanding how much you're giving away, and just working with it as your working assumption. Unless you really can have very advanced capabilities to completely protect your information, then you just have to assume that your data tells everywhere. But we have examples, for example, in certain countries in DRC, where sort of even activists, human rights activists, have been forced by security forces to hand over their phone and then to give the code, and then from the phone, all their networks can be identified. But then again, in the past, when you had all of that in your notebook or you're in your address book, then, if your notebook or your address book is stolen, then that's exactly the same thing. So it's about understanding and mitigating and recognizing, where those risks are, and having the right strategies. I think I'll stop here, can come back later if it's needed.
I just wanted to add something very quickly on that point. So throughout the interviews, what we realize is that mediators adopt very different strategies to protect the integrity of the interlocutors. And so you have the one extreme where the person would never even bring a watch to a meeting, would not use like a modern car, would just meet in very remote places. And so that's the one extreme sort of paranoid approach to protecting the integrity of the interlocutor. And then you have the other approach, which is total transparency. So if you publicize whoever you're meeting with, what the substance of your discussions are, then there's no need to take any measures to protect the identity and to protect the substance. So what we see is that each mediator will apply a particular strategy in order to deal with this issue of security. And maybe another point is the fact that this is not different from what it was before. It's just the tools have evolved. There's not been a revolution here. Protecting the identity or the integrity of your interlocutor was always an issue for a mediator. So if you were talking on the phone with a conflict party, there's always the risk that the phone was bugged, even 20, 30 years ago, or that the person will be located. And so I think that's important to understand that there's not been a radical change that has taken place because of these new technologies. There's just a need to understand how these technologies work.
Thanks. Great comments and questions. Three kind of pieces I'm picking out. This point about mediation skills and how it plays out in the virtual space, it's quite interesting. We spoke to some mediators who have done this virtual dialogue, and one big downside is it's much more difficult to build rapport between the parties, right? If you don't have personal direct interaction, it's difficult to develop trust in another person. So that was the downside. But the upside people mentioned is that it's easier for people to get to listen to the other side. Somehow the barrier of the virtual space makes a kind of respectful, ritualistic exchange where you speak and then you listen more likely somehow. But maybe we need to study this more, but I thought it was an interesting point. On the echo chamber comment, really relevant aspect, and probably the lesson from it is that indeed mediators need to be able to draw on specialists who can help make sense of what's going on in the virtual space, and have savvy in this. So in terms of understanding the narratives, that's an obvious potential. Whether or not mediators should also be engaged in shaping the narrative in the virtual space, I think that's another question. And sort of the intuitive reaction would be probably you would have to be very careful to do that, because if you're starting to engage in this space, then you're not really distinguishable from other actors anymore, and you may also be very openly challenged and be engaged in all kinds of sideshows that are not really relevant for what you're doing. So understanding the conflict drawing on social media for that, but sort of very proactive engagement, maybe some question marks related to this. And then a third comment from the online space about institutional memory. I think one perhaps shouldn't exaggerate the difference. I mean, previously, a lot of the communication that now happens via WhatsApp happened on the phone or through emails that weren't necessarily recorded. I think when crucial documents are being shared that are really necessary to understand the evolution of a process and the party's position, that's when people need to have the reflex and find a way of translating what they have on their WhatsApp feed into a format that can indeed be archived and saved and can be made available to people who may join the mediation team at a later point. So probably team members need to be aware of that fact. But it's something that should be relatively easy to mitigate.
Thank you very much. I think that we will maybe have a time for a quick round of questions, one more, before we move to the other two groups. If there are more questions in the room, the gentleman over there.
Good afternoon, Derek Wesser de Stockalper from the Quanalytics think tank. Thank you so much for this very interesting talk. Two concepts, one mediation, trust, and psychology. One technology which you haven't mentioned is decentralized trust, blockchain, for example, and I was wondering if it's something you had looked at as a way to maybe fluidify information exchange, sharing, and maybe data sources. And psychology, I'm thinking about new types of big data providers like Cambridge Analytics, who could maybe provide profiling of key actors of mediation, and whether this could actually anchor negotiation from the outset in a way which maybe some people don't realize. Thank you.
Thank you. And the lady in the front row, thank you.
Thank you. That was very similar to my question. So I run a think tank in India. I also lived through the Tunisian revolutions. I was there when that media was. So I was going to ask, are there any new technology platforms that you're thinking of beyond the social media that exists, and how that would look like? And it was exactly on the blockchain. And also the ID 2020, when it said that everybody in the world would have an identification. So what could be some of the new platforms, if any, thought? And also, how will you take your voice to the United Nations, to where, things like Syria and Rohingyas can be prevented? Or how can the mediation from here reach some of the official agencies, since it's represented here? Thank you.
We'll now hear no comments from the web. Then I think we will take again these two comments here, and then we move to the next two group. Maybe we invert the order. David, you want to start? You want to start? Who is ready?
I don't have a reaction at this point.
So far in the interviews that we've conducted, we haven't come across examples of blockchain being actively used. So I certainly cannot talk from an empirical basis about how it's being used in the mediation field. There's a lot of work amongst development actors and humanitarian actors looking at blockchain. So this is a thriving field where there's more and more initiatives in order to use blockchain as a means of sort of accessing people and having, as you say, this decentralized trust mechanism. And I think there are a lot of promises I personally haven't yet seen something that I'm convinced is actually really relevant to the field of mediation. I think it's an exciting technology, but there's also a fair amount of hype around it. So would love to hear if anybody in the audience has really relevant example in relation to blockchain and mediation specifically. I've got a degree of skepticism while thinking that it's very promising, sort of more in the development environment. On the psychology, again, I mean, there I can talk only, you know, this is all new and evolving in terms of the practice in the field. So I can only give a personal opinion based on what I have seen. And that's first, some of the psychological profiling that some of the companies that have been highly publicized in the media, and I will not, you know, specifically name them, some of that has been hyped, I think. I have still a degree of skepticism as to whether really it is quite as accurate and quite as extensive as what has been reported, notably in the context of the US elections, when this is when it got most media profile. I also would question in the kind of conflict mediation where access to technology, although fast increasing, still remains quite limited, that this is actually a very useful tool. I would remain to be convinced, let's say. And I think it comes with huge ethical questions in relation with data privacy, data ownership, confidentiality of data, and all of that. And you know, here I'm speaking in the context where you've got the new GDPR coming into force in the EU about data protection, data privacy. And again, now there I would look to the humanitarian actor. I think the ICRC have done a lot of work on digital ethical issues and responsibilities. So has Harvard. There's the Signal Code for anybody who's interested. You can look it up, which are what are the rights and responsibilities in relation to privacy, to data, to protecting, you know, sort of the data of refugees, of conflict parties, and so on. I think that's, again, we need to look at how this field evolves, but I would do so with a word of caution on you know, what the technology provides.
Thank you very much. I now look around the table also for those who have not yet contributed, if there is any comment that you want still to contribute. Otherwise, we move to the next two groups.
Maybe just to echo what Joel said, that we should be really, really cautious because we live in the really high hype environment in media and other developments. One hype is definitely around blockchain technology with a lot of potentials. There is also considerable hype in artificial intelligence, big data, and the data scientists. For example, we are doing at Diplo, we are going to real bottom of what is the function of data scientist. And we're doing it by using our data and analyzing step by step, because we read quite a few articles, books, we try to implement, and whenever we try to do it, we came to some sort of, well, common sense question, is it really data science? And what we will probably report it in June to see what is the hype and what is sort of a real reality of the data science. What Joel mentioned is the analysis of social media and other tools. But again, you're speaking about huge industry. Universities are opening data science studies, and we're still looking for the convincing curriculum. But basically, ultimately, it comes to the common sense and the good questions, good research hypothesis, good analysis, good understanding of the content in many respects. Then technology can help. But what we are seeing is that the world is the turnaround, and this is driven by hype when it comes to blockchain, artificial intelligence, data science. And what was really refreshing in our discussion in consortium was that from the very beginning we started with this open to be convinced, but a skeptical view. And I can see this is shared in the room as well.
Just react on that last point simply because I think that's very much an open question. And what I would simply say is I've been looking at some work that's being done, for example, on mapping social media activities around the white helmets in Syria. And there has been, arguably a whole campaign to discredit the White Helmet as a humanitarian organization in Syria. I will not go into the details, but there are various hypotheses as to why this is happening. But if you use a data scientist that use the right technology and shows you the mapping, as I had the opportunity to do, and really look at the mapping, it is completely fascinating. The story that it tells you about where the campaigns come from, how they are amplified through the social media, and therefore what are the kind of agendas behind the various groups, and they're very disparate actually, that are participating for very different reasons in a campaign like that one, which has the objective of discrediting an actor. And I think because of the reputation risks that are attached to the role of a mediator, where at the end of the day, if the mediator loses the trust of the parties because there has been a campaign against them or misinformation and etc., I think there is a case for developing the ability to really do a much more thorough understanding and analysis of what's happening in the social media. But those are, again, early hypotheses based on the evidence, the kind of example that I'm seeing. And maybe in answer to another question that was raised earlier, there are very, very innovative platforms that are emerging. It's very often the private sector, actually, that are now setting up new platforms, new tools to do this analysis, as well as universities, a lot of work in Harvard. But you can now do an amazing amount of work. I've seen a demonstration recently by one platform and one more like an incubator. They do sort of early warning of imminent aerial bombardment using a mix of sensors, using blockchain, and that is critical for people working in the field, having the ability. It's only minutes, but it's a life or death. Minutes of difference if you can have that early warning of aerial bombardment. So again, this is evolving, this is moving fast. There's very exciting new technology. There's a lot of hype as well. There's a lot of biases. There's a lot of inherent risks. And there's I would say, an ethical responsibility to understand that technology so as to do no harm at the very least. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Indeed, also there is an ethical dimension in all of that. An obligation to understand. While I feel that too often we just use this technology without really understanding all what is behind. There were a number of observations relating to data, and I think that will provide us a perfect bridge to start the next segment of our discussion. And we'll now give the floor to Ms. Barbara Rosen-Jacobson from DiploFoundation, who actually will talk about data for mediation.
Thank you. Yes, as you already mentioned, I will be focusing on data, which has been quite a prominent aspect in our discussion so far. And this was an excellent bridge. We already know that we need data scientists in the mediators team, and we also know that there's a lot of unclarity about what these data scientists will do. And Diplo has been looking at this interplay between data and diplomacy for a while now, and we published a report back in February on the potential of big data for diplomacy. And we really found that data is often perceived as this unstoppable force for innovation, some sort of defining element of modern society, and it has even been called the new oil, so the world's most valuable resource. And although these promises and perils are often slightly exaggerated, no one can really question the reality of data. Mobile phones collect GPS Yeah, of course. Sorry. Mobile phones collect GPS signals wherever we go. And almost 500,000 tweets are tweeted every 60 seconds. Satellites generate continuous streams of images, and smartwatches really literally keep our fingers on the pulse. So in this ever-changing environment of information, the question arises, what is the potential for the mediator to use this information? And data itself is nothing new for mediation. Mediators have always had to rely on information that is complete, that is accurate, that is timely, to ensure that they are up to date on the latest developments in a conflict and the developments in mediation and negotiation processes. But new forms of data could help mediators to really better capture the context in which conflict resolution takes place, as this data could be more comprehensive. It could capture sources that were previously not available. It could be more timely, as big data is often generated almost in real time. And it could be inclusive, as it could capture those sentiments or facts about population groups that were previously out of reach. So these are some of there are already some examples of digital sources that can be exploited to get big data for conflict mediation and for conflict analysis. This includes social media, and we've already heard quite a bit about it, how it can detect xenophobia, discrimination, but also sentiments between population groups or sentiments towards a peace process. Mobile phone data is a very important source of information, as it could detect population movements such as refugee or migration streams, but also abnormalities in communication between groups or in certain areas that could identify attacks or intensity in conflict. And then we have sensors and satellite data, and I was really impressed by this example that you provided about aerial bombardments that might be even predicted through such data. And finally, there's data that is generated by peace processes themselves, often in the forms of texts, and this also will be further discussed by Jovan Kubelia. So new forms of data could contribute to mediation in a number of ways. It could provide a better understanding of what is going on in a conflict, both before real conflict breaks out, such as an early warning indicator. It could understand conflict developments as they happen, but also monitor trends after a settlement has been reached. Second, it could provide an understanding of real-time dynamics, providing an up-to-date snapshot of what is happening. And it could provide an understanding of general trends in mediation by analyzing previous mediation efforts and text and digitized into institutional memory in a way. But as is probably a trend in all our presentations, there are opportunities and there are challenges. And I identified 5 here, but there are a couple more, I would imagine. And the first, and it has already been mentioned quite a bit, is data protection and security. And this is especially important in conflict areas. And the question is there enough knowledge and capacity on the part, for example, of mediators or mediation team to keep personal data safe and secure? And is it wise or ethical at all to collect such sensitive data from conflict areas? And this also relates to the second point, that data might not be representative, or data might be manipulated. For example, if you measure social media trends, there's a very particular group in society that uses social media, so you will only know about the perceptions and sentiments among that particular group. In addition, some actors might have an interest in interfering with data collection, or, for example, attempting to suppress mobile phone signals or social media access. Third, when relying on big data and new forms of data, it is often important to enter into partnerships to actually obtain this data or obtain these insights. And these partnerships are often with internet companies or other private sector actors that are often very powerful. And these are companies like Google, Facebook, and Twitter. But especially when data is sensitive, these kind of arrangements can be tricky to make, and
there is not really a blueprint for a perfect partnership with such a private sector actor or an internet company. So how to effectively engage with Silicon Valley is another question that might pop up when you engage with big data for mediation. Fourth is knowing the limits of data. Data is not a panacea. It will not result in some sort of magic key to perfectly understand the situation. On-the-ground knowledge is still essential, and it would be a mistake to think that more data is always better. And then my final obstacle is related to this, and that is the outcomes of analysis of big data often are in the form of trends or patterns or correlations, but it will give you limited insights into why things are happening. What is the exact causal mechanism? And big data will give you insights into what, but not necessarily why. And this is also why traditional expertise is still very much needed, and why I don't think that robots will take over mediation efforts anytime soon. So to make the most out of this data revolution and to really kind of balance these opportunities and challenges, I think it will be important, at least for the working group, to really collaborate and without attempting to reinvent the wheel. Because there are already a lot of actors that are looking into this, or looking at least in the niches that this touches on, whether it is data for humanitarian affairs, data for conflict analysis, in innovation labs at universities, for example, but also UN units, innovation units, global pulse, humanitarian data exchange, and then you have NGOs, private sector actors. So there's actually already a lot of activity. And I think for us it will be important to identify what is going on, what is really needed in this sector, and how to fit all these little puzzle pieces together so that we can make sure that relevant and timely data analysis are done and actually reach the mediator when they need it. And how to ensure that mediators are able to assess and verify and understand what kind of data they have in front of them. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you and to hearing your inputs and to really update mediation to the big data era. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. It is now time for Mr. Joan Corbalia from DiploFoundation that will introduce the theme of artificial intelligence and text mining.
Okay. Thank you, Enrico. And I think there is a clear logical sequence between data and artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence development are related mainly to the availability of huge amount of data. Early attempts to simulate our activities there were 4 iterations there, and my colleague numbered of the development of artificial intelligence. All previous were attempts to simulate our procedure, activities, and to transfer them into digital form. Now we have a data which is the basis for the analysis, and in data we can discover patterns and do some predictions. And this is general context and link between data and artificial intelligence. In the economy, there is a huge move towards development of artificial intelligence applications from the current phase where business model of big companies have been based mainly on monetizing data for advertising. This is the huge shift in the economy. And this is the reason why there is a lot of investment in the field of natural language processing, machine learning, and other techniques related to artificial intelligence. Now, I just heard from a friend of mine that the artificial intelligence discussion moved to kafanas in the Balkans or sauna in Finland. Therefore, everybody is now reflecting on it. Therefore, we have to be careful not to repeat what is already in the media, in public discussions, in saunas in Finland or kafanas in the Balkans. Therefore, I will try to find a way, with my skeptical hat, I will try to find the angle as relevant to mediation as it is possible. Now, when we started discussion on artificial intelligence and mediation, we started with the hypothesis that it is not possible to automate mediation. This was our starting hypothesis. For the reasons that were already mentioned, it is very unique, interpersonal activity. There are very little procedures, unlike in diplomacy and the UN, when you can rely on procedures. Whenever you have structure of procedure, it helps with the analysis. That was our starting hypothesis. But the more we have been moving into the field, my skeptical hat was removed, be open for a new possibilities. And this is what Joel mentioned. There are now more and more serious breakthroughs and sometimes covered in media by hype, but sometimes really, really realistic when it comes to the potentials. I will mention a few of them. One, which is the most fascinating for me, although not reported that much in the media, is the project Libratus. This is a project of basically automating the poker game. You're probably familiar with the victory of the artificial intelligence against a Go player, and this is now reported widely, first chess, then Go. But one which hasn't been reported then, which is in my view even more challenging than Go, is the poker game. Because in poker, you have the element of cheating and you have element of human interplay. And according to the last game, which happened 2 years ago, the poker machine developed by Libratus project won the games against the 4 leading poker players. And I just found on the net statement from one of those guys, the player Don Kim. I used to play a bit poker, but I'm not expert in the field anymore. And he said, after losing at this competition in 2016, I didn't realize how good it was until today. I felt like I was playing against someone who was cheating. like I could do with my cards. I'm not accusing it of cheating, it was just that good. Now, in this research against my skeptical view, when I read that, then you dig Wikipedia, you move around and you say, hey, this is serious. And then I went to the ways how they did it. Basically, they taught the computer basic rules of the poker, and then they created 2 poker players with understanding of basic rules, and they played around 2 trillion hands in terminology of poker. And based on this play, they were generating the insights and developing strategies. It's a bit more complex, and we'll share with our group how it was done. But that was the entry point when I started being, wait, we should be open for some possibilities in this field. It led me to another thread in our discussion, which was initiated by our attempt to organize computerized negotiations 7 years ago. Dan, was it 7 years ago? Yeah. Around the 3C negotiation. I don't know what it is called. It was done by Swiss government, and they said, hey guys, we cannot bring everybody in Geneva. Why you don't organize something on the net? And we did it, and what we found during this negotiation was, it was initially technical exercise, but the more you're digging into the process, you're realizing ethical aspects, you're realizing social dynamics, and you're realizing power plays. During that exercise, and we'll share with the group, one of the conclusions was that the big powers who have a power to impose over in the negotiating room in the UN or places all over the world, they got concerned because the technology, the platform was in a way equalizer. Because you put your statement, the other have to comment, and then the few guys, I won't name the countries, they said, hey, we won't negotiate. Then they boycotted the online negotiation, and the last phase was in Geneva, and then they played basically traditional negotiations. Now, all major researchers in this field are showing, like Georgia Tech University with the Facebook AI research, very interesting research on artificial intelligence and negotiations. They have that conclusion that AI affects the power distribution like any other tool. And those who have a lot of power, they tend to be uneasy to move into any sort of automation beyond the conference room. It was the insight from their research, and we will share in the follow-up a few other researches that we consulted in addition to our research in the preparation for that. Second interesting insight was that robots, in inverted commas, are more ethical than humans. You get more fairer negotiation, you get more fairer distribution. Okay, fairness and those questions are up to the debate, but generally all the studies that we consulted, 4 studies, and our experience shows that there is more element of fairness. A next element which is very, very interesting that this Georgia Tech study shows that computers can be deceptive, as we show from the poker game. They can do what Richard mentioned in his question. They can reframe the question easily. They can restructure the discussion and put it into a different context. And they basically can also deal with the problem of the social distance. Therefore, my assumption, initial assumption, forget artificial intelligence. This is very interpersonal. It's very human. It needs the eye contact. It needs the body language, as we have today in the room and online. Those assumptions have been challenged when it comes to the ethics, bias, power distribution, and other elements. What does it mean? Practically, it means that we have to be open for possibilities that technology and push for technology will make, in particular when it comes to text analysis, which is the other part of our title, where we have been doing for the last 10 years analysis of transcripts from the Internet Governance Forum. This is the annual gathering of the people involved in digital policy. And what is interesting from these meetings is that whatever is said is transcribed in the text. Therefore, we have about 10 years of the text analyzing, for example, how prefixes are used. Cyber, digital net. Now, this is not even artificial intelligence. You can do it with simple word search. But we detected at one point that which was popular 10 years ago, started disappearing. And it was replaced by cyber, net, virtual, digital in the latest phase. One of the reasons was that the European Union had the so-called, well, there is no failures, but not so successful agenda, famous Lisbon agenda. Therefore, they had even to reframe, which was mentioned previously, use of prefixes. Therefore, today you have digital single market, everything is digital in the European Union, and obviously Europe very often with soft power is influencing the overall global narrative. Now you can get to this type of insights, and what does it mean? When somebody starts speaking about cyber, you immediately know this guy is coming from the security community. Mentioning digital economy, development communities. Therefore, this exercise on the text mining will be presented during our research and discussions. And we are also trying to gather together institutions in Geneva ecosystem. We have colleagues from EPFL, there are people from University of Geneva, in the broader ETH, with a lot of research in artificial intelligence, robotics, and a related field. And one idea will be to see to what extent detection of emotions by facial expression, which according to some research is moving relatively fast, to what extent it is developing, or question of text mining and the new platforms. And with this, I will conclude. There are quite a few new platforms provided by, for example, Google, Jigsaw, which is their sort of application of their artificial intelligence tools to the, let's say, international relations conflict resolution. Microsoft is trying to do something similar, Amazon and other companies, for different reasons, to play the good social role or to gather more data for their analysis. Therefore, in our research, we will be also monitoring artificial intelligence and other platforms that you can use practically for text mining, predictions, or identifying patterns in the mediation-related activities. Well, I'm sure that many of you will subscribe to our group. Good.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Jovan. I think fascinating remarks on issues that are not too familiar, I think, to everybody, but that for sure have a lot of potential. Just we're talking about mediation today, but for sure, basically on all the fields, in our professional fields. So again, we'll have an opportunity for the next 15-20 minutes to gather a couple of rounds of questions, and then we will move to a closing. The gentleman down there.
Thank you very much again. A question on risk and artificial intelligence. It's just a comment. I don't know if you're familiar with maybe a new type of risks emerging from that type of research. And one I want to share with you is actually what happened last year with a large social platform who tried to initiate negotiation between two AI bots. And after a few days, they just couldn't follow what was happening because they had developed their own language. So suddenly you find yourself in your new type of reality where you're not part of. So I was just wondering if it's maybe a dimension you're going to consider before actually unleashing that type of power. Thank you.
Very often also in real life negotiation, the parties develop a language of their own that you don't understand, so it will not be completely new to mediators, but this is just a joke. Any other comments from the room? The gentleman over there?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Andreas Silblinger from IPTI at the Graduate Institute. Obviously, this is a very interesting initiative for us because it also looks at inclusion from various angles, and I think all the thematic groups touch on it. I had a lot of other comments also on the social media group, but I hold back. I think it's quite interesting to see how, or would be interesting to see how social media, what it does to participation, how it changes the networks that can actually can collaborate or participate in mediation processes, how it changes the power dynamics, how it takes away gatekeepers, but maybe also increases new ones or introduces new ones. With regard to that data mining or data collection, really, I was interested to hear also how you think the kind of political component of actual data collection could be figured in when you do it through cyber technology, because so far in mediation processes very often you have consultations and the like, and they are also political exercises. They legitimize the process. So how would you think about that? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of contributions from the web.
Thank you very much. One question comes from Asif. Technologies are developing at a very different pace, but the question then to ask is if mediators can trust such technologies during the conduct of political processes. The consequences of missteps or the ethical aspects of such issues would need to be examined. Is somebody doing this work in academia or in policy circles? And the second question is from Rajinder. There is little talk about perceptions of evidence for mediation, and I believe that perception is key for the mediation process, taking into account also echo chambers. How do we integrate perceptions, points of view of collected and non-collected evidence into the mediation process? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I saw there were a couple more hands in the room. I think maybe we will take all the questions at once, and then we will open for a last round of observations. We have a gentleman over there and a lady over here.
My name is Mohammed Bakhit. I'm from the Permanent Mission of Sudan. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this very important topic. And I think we are in the digital era. It touches everything. If you are going to trade, to, as you mentioned, for mediation and so on. But I think in the mediation section, we have to observe the personal element. I think some of the presenters already touched upon this issue, but I think we can use technology and even the media when it is necessary for a mediator to disseminate information for a wide range of participants or conflict parties. But when it comes to confidentiality, I think it is very important also to observe this kind of trust, even for from the parties to the mediator himself. So if there is no these ethics and values, I think also there will be a problem in reaching to solving the problem which is already in place. And I think also we have to tackle the issue of the development. When you are talking about peace process, for example, in remote areas, and especially in armed conflict or civil war or so on. It's difficult to use the media or even to use technology, because maybe even the infrastructure is not in place. So I think the human elements and the level of development also of the conflict parties and so on is important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again. My question is about the complexity approach to conflict analysis. Some of you talked about the way new tech can help us do data mining, collect information, etc. And there was this research agenda that kind of died out about the complexity of conflicts and the fact that they are so complex that the human mind actually cannot fully comprehend them, because the human mind has to simplify things to actually deal with them. And it's this whole approach about the fact that there are multiple feedback loops and that causes can also be effects and vice versa. And it's true that mediators have an incredible difficulty dealing with this complexity, and this agenda kind of died out, this research agenda, and I was wondering if new technology could actually revive it, and maybe machines would be better than humans at actually apprehending and analyzing this complexity and making it digestible for mediators when dealing with very complex conflicts like Syria, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we will proceed with the questions. We'll now give an opportunity to the different panelists, starting with Barbara and Johan that they just presented, to react on the questions and comments you just posed. We'll then also open the floor to the others for their concluding remarks, and then we move to the next one.
Thank you. Thank you for these very excellent questions. I really scribbled on every kind of blank page, space on my page. I think a couple of things that were pointed out are very important. One of them is kind of the role of data and data mining in this process compared to kind of humans. And as was mentioned by the representative from Sudan, these technologies should be used when necessary, but I would also say they should be used when they can augment the human brain, and that also relates to the last comment, that humans indeed simplify, but then we also need to recognize that a lot of digital technologies also simplify things for us, and if in the end mediators are kind of the last person to which this information and these analysis get to, then data analysis will always be simplified, whether it is through visualization or by capturing exactly those elements that data scientists want to communicate with mediators, because big data can say so much that you can also maybe sometimes cherry pick a message. So this is something to also watch out for. If these processes are more automated, and if there's artificial intelligence getting involved, and if these kind of mediation machines also get to make decisions, then maybe there is a potential here. But don't underestimate the fact that data analysis itself also involves a lot of simplification in order to communicate these results as well.
Just a few comments on this excellent question. First, from Asif, best regards to Asif in New York. We met recently in Belgrade and had a discussion on the IT and the mediation. And Asif, definitely the trust is crucial. And I would say that all of these tools that we discuss are good servants, but I would be cautious if they try to become masters. And this is the line where we have to be careful. In, for example, juridical processes, we have now well-established practice in quite a few countries when judges can rely on artificial intelligence processing and tools and get advice which then coincide with their final ruling to approximately between 70 to 80%. Well, in this 20 to 30%, you can have decision of the important decision for human freedom, for the commercial relations. But if there is a hint coming from the machine, it could be useful. Therefore, that is the general principle, and we may negotiate that line between servant and master ahead of us. Singularity, people think it will happen in 2045, where the artificial intelligence and the real intelligence will merge. I'm a bit skeptical, but well, that we'll have to see if we're still around, some of us. And then there was a question of language. This is well-known example from the Facebook, where Facebook bots started creating their language, but in an artificial intelligence field, it is also well-known that they call it shutting AI project. When they just stop, then the things get out of control, and they literally press the button and shut down the system. And that's well known in the artificial intelligence. As Enrico said, when we move around these buildings from WTO, you have the languages which are basically aimed to protect the professional turfs and anything. In this building, climate change, mic community internet governance, and that's where the machines replicated it extremely well and went even one step further. Then we have a question on the trust, and another finding of this George Tech analysis was, and other research, is that artificial intelligence agents are more prone to finding the compromise than the humans negotiators. This is an interesting, because they calculate and they find easier the question of compromise. And I think Barbara reflected on the question of the importance of the human intervention. Question of perception is extremely important. There was this question, and one issue that we have to keep in mind: we as humans, we like to create ambiguities. And if you analyze more or less the whole crisis situation in the world, from nowadays the Brexit discussion on the Northern Ireland, Irish, Catalonia, Madrid, Barcelona, Kosovo, Balkans, you move around, there is always ambiguity. And there is a problem if machines are going to try to simplify ambiguity. We need ambiguity in order to deal with complexity of social interests. Therefore, that would be probably border zone where I would be careful about use of IT. We have to leave the space for the ambiguity, because this is very often the only way to reach the compromise and to have a face saving to the negotiators. We shouldn't forget that negotiators very often negotiate more with their crowd back home than with the opposite side. In mediation, I guess it's the same.
Thank you. Maybe just on that, on the question of ambiguity, what we often call constructive ambiguity in mediation jargon. It is true, I agree with what Giovanna just said, but at the same time, I also believe that this ambiguity is based on realities. It is not an ambiguity in the mind of the mediator. So in a way, the technology can help us understanding the reality, and then if we need to put on top of it a certain degree of constructive ambiguity, the human will still do it. But the step before, I think, in building the understanding is as important as the ambiguity element of it. That was my little comment. Let me just look around the table if you want to make some final comments.
I'm glad somebody mentioned the point about perceptions, because they are so critical to shaping a conflict environment. And I would just simply flag there was a very important report jointly done by the UN and the World Bank that was issued last week called Pathways for Peace, that looks at this whole question of the peace environment, the conflict and the dynamics. And it's very interesting because it really emphasizes this question of perceptions, how perceptions matter to shaping the path towards peace, and also narratives. And I think so that's very relevant to this conversation, and that's why I would just flag it for anybody who's got an interest. And it links to the question you ask about complexity analysis, because anybody who wants to operate in a conflict environment, part of the challenge we always have is how do we do a conflict analysis that is deep enough, that genuinely informs us, not just on what's happening at a particular moment, but the trends. How are the power relations evolving? How are the perceptions evolving? And I don't know whether complexity analysis will see a revival, but there is a potential to do it, provided we really put in place all the safeguards and are aware about all the ways in which the technology will be gamed and abused. But I think that, you know, that's part of the exciting thing about those new technologies, the whole big data analytics and machine learning, because potentially they can genuinely enhance, our effectiveness at trying to resolve those incredibly complex crises. I think the point also that was made by a Sudanese colleague is very important about different accesses to technology, because it does mean that one of the biases we need to be aware of is in terms of access to this technology. And it increases the power asymmetries in a mediation. And that is something that just leads me to my final point, which is even if the mediator decides they don't want to use the technology, everybody else does. So the whole environment is influenced either by who has the technology and access to it and how they use it to enhance their power and influence, or who doesn't and might be left out and may be critical simply because they don't have a voice, because they do not have access to those ICT technologies. And that is part of the challenge of understanding the digital landscape. It's not only those that have access and use it, it's also that those that don't, and how does it shape the mediation environment.
Absolutely, that makes me think that in a way the catchy phrase cyber mediation that we decided to use for this initiative is imperfect. The reality is maybe the more appropriate title is mediation in the digital era. So it is not really the mediation that is obliged to take all this, the advantage of this tool, but anyway, it is happening out there. So at least the mediator has to take into account the digital environment around him or around there. So just, but still, cyber mediation, I think it is still a nice catching phrase, hopefully. David?
Yes, maybe just a general comment in terms of the significance of new technology in mediation. I mean, it definitely creates a new set of challenges, kind of additional curveballs thrown at the mediators, and Joelle covered a few of those in terms of confidentiality challenges, security, the fact that mediation takes place more in a public space. Mediators may be attacked for what they are doing. At the same time, there are opportunities as well that new technologies offer to mediators, and we covered a few in the last 2 hours as well, in terms of a tool that can allow mediators to reach out, gather information, have easier communication with the conflict parties. But on the grand scheme of things, I think the fundamentals of mediation, they stay the same. The politics of mediation, right? The fact that oftentimes mediators are thrown in contexts that are not actually ripe for a negotiated settlement, where the political will of the parties to move towards a negotiated settlement is tenuous, where they vacillate between war making and peacemaking. That stays the same. And also at the table, the process of building negotiations between, warring parties that have spent many years trying to kill each other and now have to constructively work towards finding a solution, and the mediator's task in steering this process while maintaining the ownership of the parties, that sort of key fundamental challenge of mediation, that stays the same. So just kind of on the broad scheme of things, new technologies change some aspects, but fundamentally mediation stays the same.
I very much agree with David. I think it's a very good point. Just maybe as a closing remark, I was thinking that I like the question that Elodie asked about complexity, and it is true indeed that conflicts themselves, but also mediation processes are extremely complex, and in a way, the mediator is by essence imperfect because human, And to correct slightly this imperfection, the new technologies can be used as a cane in a way, but it doesn't solve the problem itself. And so what I also liked about this event is that the quality of the questions and the number of the questions and the comments that were provided to us showed us that there's enormous work that needs to be done. There's also a lot of interest, and despite the complexity, I think we need to develop our reflection and try to produce something that is concrete, that is actually useful. So we don't stop at the sort of reflections that we have, but we try to produce actionable items or knowledge. And I find this initiative an incredibly useful platform for that. And I wanted to thank again Enrico for spearheading this, for Barbara for the incredible work that has been done, and obviously Jovan, David, and Joel for their contribution.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much to everybody. Thanks for the kind word. It is actually my turn. No, first of all, one additional tweet that is provided us by DiploFoundation. We have a visual that hopefully attempt to capture the very rich complex. We talk about complexity, the complexity of our conversation. So we'll play it on the screen.
It was the well. It's not good to explain the visuals. They should talk. But let me just give you what our illustrator did. He did 3 circles reflecting discussion. Mediation in the center. Is the key activity. And there is a robot there which is helping mediator, and then you have a support for mediation with analysis, with somebody trying to catch the tweets in the middle of then you have the social context, reality with the Red Cross conflicts, parallel economy, and that probably is the first illustration. If you will have a printed copies over there as a sort of summary of from the view of our illustrator in Belgrade, Professor Vladimir Veljašević. And then if you have any other comments, we can start developing a comic book or illustrative conclusion of our discussion.
Thank you very much. We thank also Vladimir for this contribution that actually summarizes well the environment and the complexity, some of the complexity that we have been discussing today. So we are about to close this discussion for today. First of all, I really would like to thank our partners here. I have to say that they were very kind to me, but in reality, this initiative will not exist without them. As you've seen in the discussion today, they are the one who bring in the knowledge, the expertise, the experience, and we are just trying to facilitate this discussion. And so it is they are the protagonists of this, and I thank you for them, and I already thank them in advance for what they will be doing in facilitating and promoting the discussion in the thematic groups. Second, I will thank all of you here in the room, in the other room that is somewhere in the virtual space. Thanks for your contribution. Thanks for your ideas. I count that to be only the beginning of a reflection. I hope that you will bring much more. You will bring other people that you think they can contribute to that. There are many ideas that you just mentioned that deserve a lot of attention and development in the coming months. So this is a little bit the intention. We hope that you found this conversation interesting, and that therefore you will decide to actively contribute and participating in our activities, first and foremost in the working groups. We will soon communicate to you how to relate to these groups. We'll give you some indication via email in the coming days. So please then reach out directly to the facilitators of the working group. And of course, we will then be sending you anyway, even if you do not actively participate, we'll send you regular updates on the activities, on possible other meetings of the individual groups, and so on and on and on, while we move forward. So once again, thank you very much. It was very instructive for sure for me. I hope also for you. And we have started. Cyber mediation is now live. Thank you very much.